All right, it is 2:32. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our social and emotional learning and RTI sustainability session. This is the fourth installment of the RTI in Action web series. I know Melissa and Judy have prepared a really good session for everyone. Feel free to use the chat box throughout and put in any questions or comments, and we will get to those at the end. And I think that's it. All right, Judy, Melissa.
Thanks, Kellen. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Judy Teven, and with me is Melissa Sinanu. And like Kellen said, welcome back to our live event series about RTI in action. And today we're going to be talking about SEL and really how to build a sustainable RTI process. And before we get started, I do want you to know that we will be recording this and sending this out to everyone who registered. But like Helen said, if you have questions during the webinar, please just go ahead and put those into chat. Our team is there ready to field them. And then, of course, we will also have a Q&A at the end of our session. So feel free to jump in for questions there too. So today we're going to talk about two of the most important but less tangible aspects of RTI MTSS. And those things are creating a framework that is effective and sustainable for all stakeholders and incorporating social and emotional learning into your MTSS initiative. And the most practical way to approach an MTSS framework is to think about the data that you want to see each time you conduct a problem-solving team meeting about a student. And that will naturally help you build a process that makes sense. So this includes, looking at screening data, grades, intervention scores, progress monitoring graphs, daily observations, and student SMART goals. All of these come together to paint a comprehensive view of student progress. So your MTSS framework needs a sustainable way to make sure that data is continually being gathered and stored in one place for meetings.
That's right. And as much as we'd like to say here at ClassWorks that buying a software program is all you need to do for success with MTSS, it's actually a great first step, but it's not the only step. Selecting ClassWorks can certainly promote sustainability and excellent student outcomes, but any MTSS process requires the steps associated with effective innovation. So it's super common in school districts for initiatives to be layered on top of each other, right? Without always thinking through the best way to merge things together in a cohesive and sustainable way. So these are the steps that make the most sense for building that sustainable MTS framework that effectively incorporates your SEL initiatives. So you start with the end in mind. You align everyone's vision right in one place. You see where programs can be streamlined across the district. You build time into the school day with the staff that you're going to be using. You start small. And then you refine your practices and processes when you expand. You will weave that social and emotional learning into the day. So how do we get where we want to go?
So start with the end in mind, right? For a sustainable MTSS framework, you need all of the data to come together, not only at your data team meetings that meet 3 times a year, but also be readily available at all student problem-solving team meetings, which are more like every 4 to 6 weeks. So you typically have one person at the problem-solving team meeting who will have that 360 view of the student available for conversation. And again, this includes screening data, grades, progress monitoring graphs, behavior information, skill-specific intervention information, and even those student SMART goals. And then your well-trained team knows how to look at all this data to determine if the student is responding to the information or what modifications need to be made to best accelerate growth. So always think about the data that a specific element will give you and how that will be used to support student growth and smart decision making. There are a ton of MTSS frameworks that look okay in isolation, but when you examine all of the moving parts, they are not only unsustainable, but they are not getting the results that you want or need.
That's right. If data isn't easily available to all stakeholders as needed, or progress monitoring participation can't be tracked at the district level, your system will ultimately not be usable, and your processes probably should be re-examined.
Exactly. So when starting with the end in mind, these are some of the attributes that you'll look for in your framework, right? So look for easy visualizations for all stakeholders. So for district level, site level, teachers, parents, and students. And you want progress monitoring that happens automatically. And what about customizations that are available to the teacher, but maybe not necessarily required by the system? And all progress monitoring data should be on a common scale. This really helps when school psychologists only need to learn a single system and know how to make sense of the data for each student without having to relearn a specific system for each individual student. And then when thinking about SEL initiatives, think about integration into MTSS, not something extra, like Melissa said, layered on top. Make sure that your SEL program gives you that regular data for student problem solving team meetings to give you a complete picture of the student, and also measure growth along the way. In other words, make sure that any steps you take with social and emotional learning also feeds data into your MTSS framework. So next, you're going to want to align your vision, right? So the ultimate goal of MTSS is better outcomes for students aligned with your school or district mission statement. And with all of that at stake, it's really important to ramp up the right way. Really think about go slow to go fast, right? So perhaps one of the most overlooked factors affecting RTI MTSS implementation is the role of culture and beliefs in a school or district. The prevailing attitudes and beliefs of a staff in a district, as well as the historical traditions and values that have evolved in the district, have a really strong influence on the behaviors of staff and students alike.
That's right, Judy. And this influence should not be overlooked as RTI systems are developing or when your RTI efforts become stalled. Data indicates that a surprisingly large number of individuals disagree with statements about the capacity of all students to achieve grade level benchmark skills. One of the foundational beliefs necessary to support a successful MTSS framework is that we can effectively teach all children. When this is the situation, RTI can become nothing more than a platitude.
Yeah, and a key part of this culture shift is making sure that all staff understand the why behind RTI and MTSS. It's critical to provide teachers with professional development and coaching that leads to support and commitment, not just compliance, right? Teachers really need time to fully understand the why and the how. They should have the opportunity to learn data analysis, grouping, and those instructional techniques that are so important. So how will you know when your school culture is changing in positive ways? Well, you'll see some of the following happen. The choir starts to preach. Teacher leaders rise up and begin to take over planning, facilitating, and analyzing professional development. Teachers will hold each other accountable. Change is definitely happening when staff stop closing their doors and strive to help one another evolve to embrace change. And your veteran staff support your new staff. This staff collaboration is proof that change is happening in your school. And you'll see new leaders emerge. Staff members express interest or demonstrate a passion for leading a new initiative. This could look like a teaching aide wanting to form a phonics committee, or teachers spearheading a trip to a math conference. And your teams will form organically. You have plenty of official groups such as leadership teams, grade level teams, and subject area departments. But when groups come together on their own, this is a sign that your culture is shifting.
Some people search for the silver bullet of intervention programs or MTS frameworks that will produce results, as if the program teaches rather than the teacher. In RTI, perhaps even more than with a core program, the data-informed decision-making is critical to success. The data analysis process must be taught to implementers so that they can experience, for example, that the success in the students' progress monitoring scores resulted from decisions they participated in and practices they implemented. There's an integral connection between making instructional decisions for a student and the assessment data that led to those choices.
That's right. Easy to read data combined with professional learning that offers teachers the opportunity to review data and practice interpreting results is really optimal. So in ClassWorks, for example, as you can see on the screen, teachers view live data in one place and can freely move between the various aspects of a student's details. So when noticing a downshift, say, in progress monitoring for a student, teachers can just click over to review student mastery within the intervention. To see if behavior is impacting student learning, they could go check in observations and then pop into goal tracking to check on student confidence and maybe even send them a note to encourage them or offer some advice.
Then, as you expand your MTSS framework and the adoption of your best practices with a team that truly understands the significance, social and emotional learning is seamlessly embedded as part of this process. So next, you'll look to see where programs can be streamlined across the district. A commitment to adopting a new framework includes a look backwards as well. So look at what you are already doing and see how a new initiative can complement or replace some of those efforts. Always look to the goal you have with your change in practice.
And a really important pro tip, check with your current vendors to see if what they offer can support a goal that you already have. Too often, people with ClassWorks who love how well students respond to our interventions will buy a separate progress monitoring tool because they don't realize that ClassWorks NCII validated progress monitoring is already included in their purchase. Teachers definitely appreciate not having to learn one more thing. Whenever you can use one platform instead of many platforms, the practice will be more sustainable, right? A key part of that culture shift that we referenced earlier is also making sure that there are no unnecessary steps or redundant practices in place.
Now, that said, you may need to integrate multiple platforms together in order to build the framework that's right for you. Let's say, for example, you have the NWA MAP screener and you have been administering it for years. You finally have teachers reading the reports and comfortable talking about RTI RIT scores, and they understand how to modify classroom lessons based on this data. You may want to build an MTSS framework that includes NWA MAP as the screener 3 times a year. If that's the case, look for a platform that can also put that data to work to build individualized interventions to accelerate learning for students, and can also be easily discussed at your team meetings. No piece of data should be left behind here. For example, in the ClassWorks platform, you can see the data from our universal screener, but also see those NWA RIT scores. So don't recreate the wheel where you have to, but look for integration when you can.
So next, build time into the school day for individualizing student needs. Once your vision is aligned and the team is committed, make sure to set up the infrastructure so that your program components can be successfully used.
A school's master schedule should identify when students will be receiving intervention services. This includes completing weekly progress monitoring and participating in goal setting as well. So at ClassWorks, we strongly recommend that the master schedule include that extra learning time built into the day, and that the personnel who'll be working in the MTSS framework are identified early, instead of deciding to put all of this on the classroom teacher to decide when they're going to do it. We've seen this happening more often this year than any other, which is great. This dedicated time not only gives students additional instructional time, but also gives staff time to set goals with students and time to conference with students about behavior and academic goals. So setting aside 45 minutes a day for students in Tier 2 and 3 to participate again in progress monitoring and intervention services ensures that your MTSS process has the time and attention that it needs. And it's really ideal if your school does not place rolling out MTSS on the classroom teacher, as we said, just to integrate it as they see fit. Having that master schedule that allows students to participate in individualized experience does help facilitate that more sustainable framework. So now let's think about the initial rollout. Initial rollout should be for a smaller group than your MTSS framework ultimately plans to encompass. Again, it all comes back to those components you'll be looking at during those problem-solving team meetings. So screening, teachers who know not only how to effectively administer the assessment, but also how to read the reports to differentiate in the classroom. Then data team members that know how to read the data and use it to help determine tier placement for students. Progress monitoring. This is where we often see programs break down. As administrators, you need easy ways to confirm that progress monitoring data is being gathered on all designated students. Also important is how to analyze the data and make good decisions for students. Then the next component relates to the intervention services themselves. If you're using the standard protocol model, interventionists know how to deliver the scripted lessons designed for small group instruction. With the problem-solving approach, the team focuses on reading the data and understanding the resources available to them and how to marry the two. Then the final component in your MTSS framework is that PBIS and social and emotional learning. It's going to be important to start small here as well and build on what you're accomplishing.
That's right. And we don't recommend rolling these out one at a time. Like we've mentioned before, you get a much more realistic picture of your MTSS framework when the smaller team is implementing all aspects of RTI, as opposed to screening one year, then layering progress monitoring on top the next. You want to see the whole framework in action to confirm that it really will be meaningful and sustainable. So with this team, you figure out what's working and what needs to be modified before doing a district-wide rollout, especially when SEL is embedded. And when we think of SEL, we always look back to CASEL. So let's quickly review the CASEL core competencies. CASEL's framework includes 5 core competencies. Now, these are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. When we talk about an MTSS framework and incorporating SEL into your practices, we're most often discussing the practical application of self-awareness and self-management for students, right? And if your district is using SMART goals, then you can extend this to the other competencies as well. But for initial rollout, you'll learn how to administer an SEL survey and how to read those results. And decide ahead of time what types of decisions an SEL survey may help impact. Then develop a standard process for documenting student behavior in PBIS school-wide. And if possible, transition this to a digital resource in your initial rollout. And educate the team about the CASEL core competencies, especially as it relates to MTSS, thinking specifically about self-awareness and self-management. And last but not least, incorporate student SMART goals for setting a growth mindset for students.
So now you have your vision established, you have buy-in from your staff about the importance of adopting new processes, and you've embarked on your initial rollout with a smaller team. For that initial rollout, you are working through the sticking points with a subset of that larger team that will be ultimately implementing your MTSS framework. So now you'll begin refining your processes as you work out the difficulties. You may or may not decide to also expand your program to all stakeholders simultaneously with this adjustment. In this stage, a few things happen. You learn from the difficulties and improve efforts. Use of the program and practices should become more routine. You'll also reflect on where training worked and where you find that teachers still need more professional learning to truly embed all of the aspects of your MTSS framework.
And larger data visualizations for district decision makers can really contribute to the view of the health and wellness of your processes, right? So for example, ClassWorks has partnered with Amazon to bring you insights for district reporting.
Yep, these detailed reports show you if the student you expect to be receiving intervention services are receiving them, if those students are being progress monitored to achieve the expected levels of mastery and growth, even which domains in the intervention they're focusing on. You can especially confirm that the students you expect to be completing probes are truly completing them, and have conversations about where changes need to be made if they're not.
And a big part of refining your processes comes from observing problem-solving team meetings, right? So make sure that the data being evaluated is current and relevant. And if students aren't being given time to work on their intervention or take their progress monitoring probes, it really is time to reevaluate. And if the data that you're seeing at these meetings lacks evidence, it's time to look at logistics to make sure that students, like Melissa just said, are really being given time needed to complete those probes weekly. And do teachers and staff really understand their roles and how to use data? It's important that teacher professional learning, and we've said professional learning a lot, provides guidance so that practices are embedded into the school day. And continue to refine the processes and practices so that their use just becomes easier and easier. And a program like ClassWorks that includes both a teacher and a student interface and all the wonderful things, of course, that we love about it: screening, progress monitoring, effective interventions, student goal setting, really to just name a few, makes rolling out your MTSS as easy as possible. But it's definitely a partnership to make sure that the application is working to meet your school and district goals, not the other way around.
And finally, don't separate out SEL, weave social and emotional learning into the framework. MTSS practices often discuss including positive behavioral interventions and supports, and SEL programs and approaches are an important component within MTSS because they are designed to promote positive academic and behavioral outcomes in students. However, it sometimes is difficult to think about how to integrate this into an MTSS framework. So here at ClassWorks, we think that as a starting place, there are 3 things that can sustainably be integrated into MTSS, especially if you followed the steps outlined earlier and built consensus, started slowly, developed usable practices, and are seeing the intervention results you need. Small surgical SEL interventions can have a huge impact. So these 3 things are SEL surveys, student goal setting with the SMART framework, and student observations. The CASEL core competencies start with self-awareness and self-management. So let's think, for example, about student observations as it relates to PBIS for students struggling with self-awareness.
If your observations are digital resources, there really are a ton of benefits. So let's look at the ClassWorks observations as an example. All teachers can see the feedback that each staff member has about students throughout the day. And this way, if Johnny is having a tough day, the teacher is aware of that before they come into the classroom instead of after, and then that the teachers experience that for themselves, right? Students and parents also have insight into the teacher's observations, and everything is in real time. So once students are developing awareness by looking at the teacher's observations, they can begin to practice self-management by working on their own SMART goals. Every student support team meeting should include looking at these student observations and the results of their social and emotional survey. And if student SMART goals are part of your school's MTSS framework, student goals should also be reviewed in this meeting.
Student SMART goals are an amazing way to bring SEL to life in your school. Instead of giving the teacher another curriculum to roll out, goal setting allows students and teachers to work together to establish those specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely goals for a class or even for individual students.
Yeah, research shows that students develop a growth mindset and develop their EQ, right? Their emotional IQ or emotional quotient, when they know that they're supported in their learning and have a sense of belonging. A two-way conversation path through a product like Classworks Goal Tracker really better invites students into the conversation of learning. Then it's super important that the student goals and progress on their goals is available as part of that problem-solving team meeting. Like we said earlier, this brings all of the cognitive and non-cognitive information about the student into one place to really make an important data-driven decision about the student.
So essentially, a sustainable MTSS framework takes the following steps. It starts with the end in mind. Again, the most practical aspect of your MTSS practice is your student problem-solving team meetings. Think about how every aspect of your framework feeds excellent data into these meetings. It aligns your vision. This includes a possible culture shift in your school from teachers about student achievement. It streamlines programs across the district. This really improves communication because interventionists and school psychologists are speaking the same language district-wide. And again, if everything can't be streamlined, make sure the data is integrated for effective team meetings. This also includes that specific time built into the school day. This time should be enough to administer progress monitoring, receive intervention services, and include student SMART goal setting. So we recommend 45 minutes a day. And again, it starts small, right? Work through those initial hiccups with a smaller team that's navigating all of the expected steps. And it's always refining. Once you expand to all stakeholders, don't be afraid to step back and refine your practices and processes. You want to make sure everything you require of teachers is meaningful and serves an important purpose. If you're going to be administering progress monitoring, but you don't have an easy way to review that data at every team meeting, or even worse, you don't know how to make the good decisions when looking at the data, step back and refine your practices. Reach out to your vendors or perhaps your state organizations for professional development about how to make the right decisions about your data. And weave that social and emotional learning into your school day, keeping in mind the time you can dedicate to it. The three biggest elements of this, again, are those daily observations, student SMART goals, and social and emotional surveys for students. Finally, don't worry about getting it right the first time. This is a continual practice that is constantly being revised. You know your program is working when growth is happening, students are moving across the tiers, and teachers have embraced the process because they see the impact.
That's awesome. Yep. I hope that this has been meaningful for you today, sharing some of the best practices that we've learned from partnering with districts as they build their MTSS frameworks that truly work. And next week's session will be the best because we will hear from practitioners about what has worked for them and how they have refined their processes for success over the years. And don't forget, you still have access to our earlier sessions as well. Week 1 discussed screening and progress monitoring. Week 2 reviewed interventions. Week 3 was about data and problem-solving team meetings. These are all linked in that Q&A doc that will be sent with in your post email after this webinar. And of course, also all the RTI in action section that we have on our website too. You can get them all there too. And I think that the link is actually on the screen. That's great. So I did see some questions come in and through our chat, and so we can open that up.
Thank you so much, guys. That was awesome. Okay, yeah, we have a couple of questions. We had a couple of people asking about the rollout and how you make the decision on how to do the rollout effectively.
Yeah, this is a great question, right? Because you don't want to start too small or too fast, too small or too big, right? So you really select a subset of teachers and students and work through those initial challenges. It can be as many as just one teacher per grade level, or as few as, or it could be a little bit larger than that. The biggest thing you want to think about, though, is selecting a cross section of teachers, so you have your full teacher type represented in that rollout, right? So that's what I would really keep in mind when you're thinking about it. And I do want to emphasize again, you're going to ask that group to do all elements of your framework out of the gate, so that you can say, whoa, we thought we had this in place, but our interventions it's tough for them to do this. Let's revisit this. You don't want them to just do part of it. That's where you'll really get that good vision of where it's working and where you need to do revising.
Nice. All right. So the SMART goals, do they just need to be about, what's in classworks, or can they be, overexpanding, overarching?
Oh, I'll grab that one. We hope that you don't just use classworks data. You certainly can really think about it being something that is to enhance the students' engagement and their ownership of learning. But again, it could also be a behavior goal. And we actually purposefully built SMART the goal tracker like that, so that you could really use this for any kind of goal setting for students. And they certainly could use mastery within classworks, but they could also use just coming to class prepared, or other types of behavior goals that have a little bit more link to PBIS. And also, let me just throw in there to make sure that you make them short goals, because this is really meant for there to be a conversation between teachers and students, but also so the students can feel like they've achieved something. And we all need those little goals along the way. We know we have large year-long growth goals, but kids need those little celebrations along the way.
I love that. And they'll be able to celebrate with their parents because their parents can see them. I love it. All right. So what kind of decisions would we make based on the SEL survey results?
So this is the $1 million question right now, right? Everyone's talking about their SEL surveys and what we can do. And I think the first thing to understand is this is pretty new in school systems, right? Figuring out exactly what we're going to do with this data and what kind of decisions we're going to make. And I think the first thing you're going to do is go, okay, where are our strengths? Where are our challenges? There are no wrong answers here. And then pick one area that you're going to focus on to make a change. For example, you see that your student sense of belonging isn't where you expected it to be. This is one area that we're going to make one small change and see if that impacts our results. We're not looking to make broad sweeping changes back from our SEL surveys. We're looking to make small incremental changes where we can. And especially after last year, we have to be really cautious that we take this information and use it with a growth mindset ourselves in the schools and not feel like we're ever being blamed for anything, because just getting this information is a really, really great starting place.
That's a good thought. Good. All right. Well, that is all I have on my end. We'll stick around for another minute or so, just in case anyone decides they have some last minute questions. But thank you so much for everyone for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you.